Do you guys like new technology and products with a retro feel that taps into that feeling of nostalgia? You know, those products that promise an experience like the good old days, but what you end up getting is really just a bunch of hype and a subpar product that after the novelty wears off, you get some buyer's remorse or you just put it on the shelf and it stays there unused. Or maybe you just have a lot of flannel in your wardrobe, you have affinity for facial hair, and you think that man buns are a fashionable hairstyle. If you've identified with anything I've said so far, then you're in luck, because the absolute embarrassment of a product put forward by the company that owns the brand name Yashica on Kickstarter, called the Yashica digiFILM Y35, is just for you. Hey fellow photographers, what did you shoot today? Now, all joking aside, this camera as it stands right now is complete garbage, and it really doesn't even make sense as a camera. And unfortunately, I think people who have backed or pledged to fund this project are going to be severely disappointed. So first off, what I think people fail to realize is that the Yashica, the company, is not really the company that it once was. It used to be a Japanese camera manufacturer, but now the name and the brand is owned by a Hong Kong-based firm called MF Jensen, which is kind of like a marketing, distribution, and manufacturing firm, sort of a conglomerate. So they're really just buying the name and then marketing things under that brand because of the brand familiarity. So let's take a look at what they're trying to do with this Kickstarter project. They're announcing the release of this camera. It's a kind of a rangefinder camera based off of old Yashica models, and essentially it's trying to emulate sort of shooting on film in a digital camera. You can kind of think of it like the Holga, right? The Holga is a film rangefinder, but instead of film, this new rangefinder is going to use what they call digiFILM, which are these little cartridges that go into the back of the camera. And what happens is when you insert a certain cartridge by some mechanism, we don't know if it's like electrical contacts or near field communication chip or something, the camera recognizes that cartridge and then shoots pictures in a style that matches whatever that cartridge is. So for example, they have like ISO 1600 for low light color film, or they have a black and white film for that classic grainy black and white look. But if we really dive deep into the specifications, there's a lot left to be desired, and honestly a lot of it doesn't really make any sense. So taking a look at the posted specifications on the Kickstarter page, they first had it listed as a 1.4 megapixel camera. Oops. I mean, that's a huge typo. That's like probably the biggest spec that people care about. What's the resolution? Since then, it's been corrected to 14 megapixels, which is not bad. The real disappointment comes in the sensor size. The sensor size is a measly 1/3.2 inch sensor. That size sensor is what you see in cell phone cameras. In fact, it was first debuted in the iPhone 5 back in 2013. That's right, this is basically a glorified point-and-shoot camera that will probably end up taking worse pictures than today's flagship smartphones. If that's not bad enough, the camera only shoots in JPEG, which means there's no ability for RAW processing. The size of the camera is going to be fairly small. Here I have sort of the quintessential Yashica rangefinder camera. This is the Y35 GSN. This is like the latest model, the last model probably they made of this style. So it's a pretty decent sized camera. This new camera is actually going to be more comparable in size to something like this, which is the Canon Canonet. So the specs and the sort of dimensions are almost identical to this camera. This camera is a little bit bigger, so it'll be slightly smaller than this, but definitely not as big as the old Yashica cameras from years past. Here's some quick side-by-side photos of the two cameras so you can get an idea of the size with a ruler here for scale. Now there's no word on a focusing system yet, but the minimum focus distance is stated at 1 meter up to infinity. And if this comes down to a fixed focus lens, that's going to add insult to injury. You're going to have no manual focus control, and you're not going to be able to get those shallow depths of field that they sort of advertise in their sort of sample shots, which are not taken by this camera because it's not even production yet. So just take that with a grain of salt. It might be a fixed focus lens, which would be awful. But hey, you can choose your shutter speed. You have a whopping 5 selections from 1 second to 1/30th of a second, 1/60th of a second, 1/250th of a second, and 1/500th of a second. This is supposedly from the mock-ups and the drawings that they have on the website is going to be a little selection knob on the top of the camera next to the shutter button. But here's the real kicker. It turns out that according to the comments made in the comment section from Yashica themselves, it's going to be a fixed aperture at f2.8, which absolutely makes no sense. And believe it or not, you're not going to be able to get usable pictures in daylight at all. So why would that be the case? Well, let's look at what we know about aperture, shutter speed, and exposure to sort of dive into this and see why this camera absolutely makes zero sense. So if we go to the board here, I have drawn up the different f-stops, right? And there's a sort of a guideline called the E16 Rule, which says that if you're shooting at f16 in bright sunlight during the day, that a proper exposure can be had if you shoot at the reciprocal of whatever the sensitivity of the film you're using, or in this case, ISO is not really sensitivity, but we use ISO as a proxy. So essentially what they're saying is on a bright sunny day, using the lowest speed film the digiFILM cartridge that they've talked about is ISO 200. So ideally we would be shooting at a shutter speed of 1/200. Well, we don't have a shutter speed of 1/200 to choose from, so the closest thing we can get is that 1/250. So this would be sort of your, give you a proper exposure in daylight setting using the E16 rule. Now, if we want to stop, open up to f2.8, we have to shorten the shutter speed, right? Because as each stop we go in, we're letting twice as much light, so we're going to have to cut the shutter time in half. So, okay, we move one over, and we get 1/500th of a second, which is great. We have that little dial, we can switch it to 1/500, which is fine. But here's the problem. If the lens is fixed at f2.8, and the fastest shutter speed offered is 1/500th of a second, we're going to be 1, 2, 3, 4 stops overexposed, which is ridiculous. I mean, you can't take a picture with the lowest ISO film cartridge, the digiFILM cartridge, in broad daylight if the aperture is fixed wide open. I mean, that's like your lens being stuck and there's too much light going in. So this camera, right off the bat, makes absolutely no sense because the scene will be way too bright. Now, you could add neutral density filters to sort of cut the light coming into the camera, but according to them, they're not even sure if they're going to have filter threads on the front lens. So this really makes no sense, and it just blows my mind that people would back this when the math doesn't add up. When we talk about exposure, yeah, there's certain low light situations that would work, but you're not going to be able to use this in broad daylight or even during the day. Now, I don't mean to rag on this project, but really, I mean, the numbers they've given so far, and admittedly, the Kickstarter page is pretty poorly translated into English, but given the specifications we have and what we know about this camera, what they're proposing with this camera, it doesn't make sense. But there is some positive news. On the comment section just very recently, Yashica has commented that they're looking at these things, and they're looking at sensor size and optics and that kind of stuff. But that just goes to show you, like, why are you backing something that is unproven, untested, and you have no idea what you're getting yourself into, and just kind of hoping that this company, which is not a camera company, it's a marketing conglomerate, that's using this brand to get attention. You're putting all your chips in this basket where you have no idea what the outcome is. Now, according to their own timeline, they're not even going to have a prototype of this until December. And because they're not going to have a prototype for some time, and we don't even know what the final rendering of the camera is going to look like, I have to urge you not to back this project. And if you already backed the project, really consider what you're getting yourself into. You're putting this trust in this company that's basically using the Yashica brand to make a bunch of money. So do you really want to trust them that they have your best interest in mind? Sure, they're going to deliver some sort of product, but I don't think it's going to be up to the standards that most people are expecting, especially when you compare it to sort of like these legendary film cameras from years past. I mean, these are a lot of fun to shoot with, and you can get one of these for way cheaper than the sort of $150, $160 introductory price. And you can get this way cheaper, and you can buy a lot of film and a lot of processing for that film with the same amount of money. Another thing is kind of the marketing behind it is a little bit deceptive, because those pictures that they show next to the film, the digiFILM cartridges, there's no way that those pictures are actually taken with anything like this camera. I mean, we're talking cell phone quality sensor, and it really doesn't make sense because they show things in bright daylight, which we know can't happen if the aperture is stuck wide open at 2.8. So these are obviously simulated images, probably with some filter that makes it look like film over it, and they show really shallow depth of field in some of the pictures, and it doesn't add up. It's not what you're going to get. I really just want people to be informed consumers, and I don't want them to throw money away at something that is unproven and could ultimately be a total waste of money. You're just throwing your money at this company, hoping for the best, and ultimately probably going to be disappointed. Now, I'm not saying this is true for all projects, and funding projects that you believe in, it can be important, but let's take a look at sort of the retro trend and how things are sort of coming back, right? In like the video game industry, right? We have Nintendo is re-releasing its sort of consoles with preloaded games. And the hype and the nostalgia behind these things drives the prices way up. But on the other hand, in the photography community, we have people like, the sort of Polaroid Impossible mashup where they released the new camera, the One Step 2. It's about to, start shipping in a couple weeks here. And it's a working camera. They already have models. The Polaroid has a YouTube channel where they show you how to use it. It's a working camera. It's a proven system. They have new film. They're doing it the right way. It might not be the best quality, but at least you kind of know what you're getting up front. Here, it's a complete shot in the dark. So if you're excited for this camera and I've burst your bubble, I apologize, but I really, it goes back to being an informed consumer, looking at sort of the science behind photography and being able to discern whether or not this actually makes sense for the sort of specs that it gives. Now, if you really want to back this project, that's fine, but wait until the prototype comes out in December. You really have to, kind of get an idea, or at least get some more updates from Yashica. I think the Kickstarter is running for at least 40 days, so at least we'll have until sometime in November where we're going to have a better idea of what's coming out. Even if we don't have a full prototype, at least by that time, we should know what's going on. And even then, be hesitant until you really know what you're going to get. So, maybe just if you want to buy it, maybe pay full price or whatever the full price comes out when it comes out. At least you know what you're going to get. So I hope this has been a little bit eye-opening, and if this information has helped you and maybe helped you from making a purchase that you might regret, or has saved you some money by not having to back this project until it comes out, let me know. And are you still going to back the project? Let me know in the comments. And if you want videos like this where we critically think about sort of the science and math behind optics and the way exposure works, then please consider subscribing to this channel, giving it a like, and sharing it with all your friends who may be interested in this camera but are caught up in the hype. So again, it's all about being informed and looking at it logically. Let's look at the science behind aperture, shutter speed, exposure, and see that this doesn't really make sense for the camera they've proposed. And wish them the best of luck, and I hope that they come up with something that's more usable or something that is going to meet people's expectations, but just don't jump to conclusions right away. Let's hold off and wait until the prototype comes out in December, or even the full camera launch around April of next year, which is a long way away. They have plenty of time to sort of remedy these things that don't make sense. But just don't back something that you have no idea what it's going to be. But in the meantime, as always, happy shooting.